make it doesn't kind of like.
Hey, so I'm just recording because whatever we say is always the thing.
That's so true. All right, so how should we start this? Just like a welcome.
I think.
Hi,
Yeah.
this is like, I'm going to call it's our Tuesday talks, just because it's Tuesday
Talks.
and we're having a talk. And you said to kind of just go with what's in your heart. And naturally, I'm still in grief. So I think that might be a good starting topic. What do you think?
I think that's great. I think everybody can relate. That's definitely something we have all experienced to some degree. So who doesn't know grief?
Oh, should we like introduce ourselves?
I think it's already there.
It's already there. All right, cool.
We are
all
humans discussing topics.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all that it is. Like, hopefully, like we said, our intention is to just, hopefully somebody gets something out of it and helps kind of ease them and whatever they're going through and kind of just gives them some clarity or whatever.
That's right. We got something out of it. Now we're just being our change.
True that. So with grief, the best quote that I heard, and I think I heard it earlier today or like late last night, was just like, okay, you have to be thankful. You have to show gratitude for grief because it means that you have loved and you have loved deeply. And that to me was like, whoa, like it kind of really took me back because I was just like, grief, especially in the moment, it could feel like the worst thing in the world. It feels like a burden. It feels, gross and icky and uncomfortable. And all you want to do is kind of hide from it. But there's, for me anyways, there's pride in knowing that you love something so much that, you're grieving a person. And yeah, it was kind of like the beginning of me kind of no longer hating the grief, if that makes sense.
Right. It does.
Yeah.
That's
Does
good.
that makes sense?
I feel that for sure. I definitely feel that because I mean, to feel those extremes of emotions, to have love so hard, right? That's what it took to feel the grief. So you couldn't feel the grief the way you did if you didn't love that hard. So I absolutely feel your words when you say that.
See, that's the weirdest thing because I would think like, especially well, for me, when I was younger, and I don't want to say like my feelings were more shallow, but I'll never forget this. I had this Walkman or this MP3 player, excuse me, that especially at the time, like these things were like expensive and like it meant so much to me. And I'll never forget the day that I thought that I lost it. I still remember it clearly because I was walking around in a Shoppers Drug Mart and I was just sulking. And my mom really had to check me because she's like, what's wrong with you? Like, that's something that you could replace. And I'm like, no, you don't know. Like, you don't know what, like, I'm grieving, like my entire life, all my songs, my entire playlist, my heart is in that thing.
Your emotions, you put yourself into that object. Absolutely.
And that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like, you wouldn't say that if I left my finger somewhere, like you'd have more empathy. And it was just like, I remember specifically grieving in that point, thinking that, the end of my world, quote unquote, was in that moment of me losing it. So then when I actually ended up finding it back, I was like the happiest person in the world. And like that to me, like that was one time where I remember, I think maybe that was my first big experience with grief. So now for me to come and then feel something like this, which is nothing compared to that. But I could see how back then that wasn't. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? So
yeah. And I think that's really powerful, the story of the Walkman, because it just shows how that's where the suffering lies. Your suffering and your grief was because over-identifying with the object, right? So exactly. It was an object and you had put so much, you were so like attached to that, you didn't see a difference between yourself and that object. That was a part of you, right? So we can understand how, I mean, with the mindfulness trading and all the things, all the things we've experienced, the different ways this can come about, right? When we have that space and we notice that we become too attached to a thing. Now that's easy to do with an object, but now we're talking people we love and have put, our emotion and love into. That's different, right?
Right, because what I learned is just like it's that space, right? Where something that you had and something that you're used to, there's a space now and now you're forced to be separate. And, to somebody who's younger, somebody like even for myself, I'll speak for myself, like at that time, that in that gap was the worst, like that was just, death. That felt gross. That was just something that was just overwhelming to the fact that like for me to want to fight my like not actually fight my mom but for me to want to argue back and be like you don't know what I'm feeling. I mean, I'm justified in those experiences, but now even with now today I'm just like it's that gap of me not seeing him again. And when you kind of fall into that, what is left there?
Mm-hmm.
And then for me it was just like, oh, when you get to the bottom of that feeling, it's just a pool of love.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, and when you actually think about it, or when you actually feel it, forget even thinking about it, when you feel it,
Yeah.
I don't care if he's no longer on this earth, wherever he is in this universe, I still feel that love. Like, I don't think anything is gonna, push that
Mm-hmm.
away.
Because
And in
that's
that moment, yeah, I was able to kind of breathe a new breath. And that, yeah, that was amazing. But like I said, I'm still like, you only get that for like, about 5 seconds and you go back to like, anger and all the other icky stuff that comes
yeah,
with it.
yeah.
But there is something that, like I said, I've been changed since I heard that quote. And I guess I'm thankful for it, as rough as it still continues to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still just building on those moments, those moments of peace, just building on them and being with those other emotions. I mean, you're speaking so objectively, you're being with those emotions. So,
Which was, oh my
yeah,
God, that was hard at one point.
well,
That was so
still
hard. It's
moment by
still
moment. Yeah.
moment by moment,
Yeah. Not even day
moment
by
by
day.
moment.
Sometimes it is just moment by moment, right?
Yeah, and like you said, it's just being okay with knowing, like, you know what, I'm not gonna feel okay 100% of the time. Yeah, that's all
Yeah.
right. I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to be sad. I'm allowed to be, all the emotions in between. But it's like, where do you come back? And when, you get a second or a moment of clarity, and what do you do with it? Where does it lead you next?
Mm. That's true, because the opposite. So I was speaking with somebody this morning. The opposite of what can happen is you box yourself in. She doesn't see choices anymore. This is happening because of this, because of this. All her emotions are coming up, and she doesn't give herself space, to see the difference between
Mm.
her and what's going on around her. So she's so caught up, right? So now she is so boxed in and thinks she has no choices, that there are no options. It does just, and then that's what leads to sometimes, well, in that particular case, it's anxiety and depression, right? To just slowly realize these are choices. This moment I'm making this choice. I don't need to take on anything not necessary in this moment, just to, take on as much as I can, and keep checking in with myself and checking in with ourselves first, because that's where the self-compassion, for yourself first. And she's now worrying about other people. Well, there's no space for that yet, right?
Mm.
Yeah,
No, that's
so
so true. That is so true. It's crazy how, like you said it again, like space is such that it's such a tricky thing, right? For me, I grew up like, educated in this system. And when I think back to all my years of schooling, how little was actually spent learning about space, and how much, you know, had I have even had the language going back then, how like how much more awareness I would have had, and how much less suffering I probably would have endured. So it's crazy because, like you said, like if you don't create that space, or if you can't see that space, everything is you and you are everything. But consequently, like in that space is where, is like that's where the freedom is, that's where the love is, that's where the joy is, that's where, everything that you're seeking is. Does that make sense?
yes, that does make sense.
Okay.
I feel it too, when you have those just moments, and then that's what you build on. Yeah, that's a daily
Yeah.
thing. That's a daily thing for everybody, right?
So
Okay.
tell me about you. What was your first experience with grief, and what was the lessons that you gleaned from it?
My first experience with grief. Well, that's interesting. I have to think of what comes up.
Hmm. Take your time.
Yeah, I guess so I lost my grandfather young, if we're going to think of a passing. So I was around 6 years old. So, and at the time I was living with my grandparents, and my mother lived in the basement apartment. Um, yeah, so that was, I wasn't allowed to feel that grief of losing my grandfather. So yeah, that was quite a journey to get to accepting, to identifying grief actually
Yeah.
would be even, I mean, my emotions, I would have considered it emotional at the time.
For a
Was
6-year-old?
Yeah, for how I was, they would have considered me over emotional, and yeah, I was not supposed to. There were circumstances around why, but more so that's not even necessarily important. What I find really interesting is when I had to think about that, I know what grief is now. I understand the label of grief now, but back then, I'm thinking back when I first experienced it, I wouldn't have even known what it was. I was just wild with emotion all the time, and not even realizing it or aware, almost never having any space between, what I was experiencing and the emotions. Yeah, so that would
Yeah,
have
but
been.
is that because of your age? Because I mean, 6. To be honest, I don't remember myself at 6. So I
Oh,
can only imagine to be dealing with such a huge emotion.
yeah, I
Like my
have.
heart goes out to the 6-year-old Cherie, you know?
Yeah, so I did a lot of that for sure. Going back, and if a scenario comes up, picturing myself how I am now, speaking to my younger self. So I would go to myself at that age, and I would give her what she needs. So she needed to grieve. So I could cry and grieve with that child now, and what would I do for a child that was grieving for a lost, grandparent? I would hold that child. I would say, let it out, feel it, notice what you're feeling. So I can do that for myself now. I can go back, and that is one technique that you can use, to recognize, your emotions, and to go back and ease how strongly attached I was to, if that did keep coming up, right? If that scenario did keep coming up. So that's how I would, yeah, handle it now.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Because I
Yeah,
forget, like,
certainly.
that's such a powerful exercise, to go back and give yourself exactly what you need. And you said you wouldn't even be able to recognize it. Like, do you remember how it kind of manifested?
um
Like, was it anger? Was it just
That
like,
was all of it. It was every emotion. I was, you know, every emotion. I could laugh and cry, and, I injured myself. I, just acted out to everybody. Oh yeah, it was always to the like extreme. Even at the funeral, I mean, luckily there was attention taken off me at the time, but I had made a bit of a spectacle at the funeral. But luckily there was other people making more of a spectacle than I was, so it was downplayed. But I do remember it, though. It is in my memory that I had behaved that way, and because just confused. I couldn't understand the change in his energy. How I visualized him, how I saw him. Um, I couldn't understand the difference. So there was no understanding in what had even happened for a fair bit afterwards. I still kept assuming I would see him again. So there was just no, yeah. So at the time there was just going to be no catharsis there for that child. So that was just like the first experience of grief. And then as I built on my experiences of circumstances, it was almost like Christmas lights that are all tangled up. I hadn't untangled any of the emotions or any of the things I'd seen or felt. I just kept building upon it and tangling everything up for a lot of years. So that's why when I think back to the stories, when I pull the story off the shelf and read the story to you, sometimes I'm not even sure like what I was feeling at the time, because it was everything. So
mm-hmm. But no, like that I like the your story about like the Christmas lights and how like they're tangled, because that paints like such a huge picture, because emotions are complicated. Like, we just have to accept that, and there is no rule book on how to deal with emotions. And something with grief is that one thing like I had to learn in this moment is that grief comes to everybody around you too, right? Like we're so interconnected, and things don't happen to us individually in a vacuum, right? Like you're grieving, and it's one thing, like the first step is even knowing that you're grieving, but the second thing is, how do you navigate that? And when the people around you are also wrapped up in their own stuff, in a sense, that could be so alienating, and that can even just add more to the confusion. So it's, I mean,
The
I
collective
really like that.
trauma, it's collective suffering. Yeah.
Collective suffering. Whew. Yeah. And then it, like I said, it just adds one on top of the other. And then you now have to get aware enough to kind of start to, untangle those
That's
Christmas
right.
lights. And
Yeah.
anybody who's done that, know that can take hours. That could
Yeah.
take years. That could take, some people get so frustrated, they're like, you know what, we'll just buy new ones.
Exactly. There's so many ways to get to the same healing. That's the whole point. There is not only one way, right? There are just so many ways. So I could look at that string of lights now. I would not spend the time to untangle it. I do not need to know every light bulb that works. I don't want to, play with each strand, like not at all. I've already restrung a new set and they're already working great, right? That's how I would see it. The job would be done because I wouldn't hold on to things now. So I don't build upon things. When you give yourself space and you notice, you decide if you're going to build upon something or not, right? So what we're building upon here, when we have these conversations, this is the stuff I want to build upon. I'll be thinking about these things later, and these are the thoughts that I want and the emotions I want to come up, right?
Got you. I got you. Yeah, my bad. I should have probably given you a heads up before I asked them that. 'Cause I
No,
don't
this
know
is
if that would
better.
trigger you or nothing.
This is so much better, because if I prepare myself, right, then I'm going to be looking at notes or trying to, fit a certain thing. This is better. If we speak freely, let it just come up and it will be what it'll be.
All right. And feel free to be like, hey, I don't even want to think about that. Like, just like, let's just move
Yeah, if
on.
that comes up, I'll let you know, but probably not too much of a concern, Chandra,
Okay.
honestly.
Cool.
What triggers me anymore?
Well, I mean,
I'd be
sometimes you never
interested
know.
though. Yeah, but then I would be curious about that experience too. So
Okay. Cool. So, sorry, you also mentioned how now, like, things obviously, like, we grow, we become more aware, and now, like, if you can recognize grief, how it manifests for you now, right? Recently, if you come into it again, like, do you kind of have like a certain go-to? Does that make sense?
yeah, I guess so. So now I guess I don't label it as grief anymore. It wouldn't be the same thing. I wouldn't put such a harsh judgment on my emotions. I would just be with them and notice moment to moment how I would be changing, like how I would be feeling. So just noticing, right? So when a trauma happened in the neighborhood a while ago, well, how did I handle that? So people were grieving around me and I felt it, and I was also grieving, but I didn't grieve in the same way. I just felt, for where was I useful? What could I do? Was there anything useful to do in the moment? If not, I can just be with these emotions, just be with these people. So yeah, I think it's just a whole different perspective now, to just not labeling it or judging it as grief.
Ah, okay. Which is, you know what, for myself, okay, so for me personally, for a long time, my biggest issue was that I didn't know what emotions were. Like, I didn't know there was something other than anger. You get what I'm saying? Or like sadness. So all these other, grief, I was like, oh, you're sad, right? So it's just like, for me, there's freedom in knowing, oh no, this is where you're at grief. And then for me, I'm able to be like, oh my God, if I'm grieving, I know I can go back and kind of like, give myself a hug and be patient with myself, because I'm having this extremely human experience that's going to need, time or space or both. So when you say judgment, what exactly, like, can you kind of explain that to me more? Like, you said
Yeah.
harsh judgment. So what does that mean from you?
that means, so when we, so for myself personally, when I label my emotions, like I don't want to necessarily put them in a box where it's this emotion, it's a specific way, and this is
Okay.
how I react. Yeah, so
Okay.
I just feel like sometimes, for myself, how I used to do that, that's how I used to start to notice what I was feeling. I would judge what each emotion was, right? Okay, I feel really angry right now, but I'm not angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sad, and I'm hurt because this happened. And then I kind of see, okay, so this was the arc of those emotions. But that's just not how it comes up for me anymore. Now I would just be like, what am I feeling right now? Right now, I'm feeling excited. I've got, things going on in the background. Like, I'm always trying to stay in the now and not label the emotions other than what I'm feeling. So it's hard to explain it. So I feel like the labels give it judgment. And then previous experiences that we've built upon it then build upon the judgment.
Okay, so essentially, like, it'd be almost like a half-packed suitcase when you call it something, there's already clothes in there, and then like for you to add more to it isn't necessarily doing you any good.
Right,
Does
right.
that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay,
the same shirt
fair
with the
enough.
same label on top of, yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Dang it. Wow. I don't think I'm there. I'm not there yet.
I think
I'm not
there's so
there
many
yet, but
ways though. I think you are there. You're there in your own way though. Like you have the space, you speak objectively. I think we speak the same language. We just come about it a little different, which is awesome because that's relatable for different people. So
oh wow. That's powerful. Thank you for noticing that. That's crazy. I mean, like, oh my gosh. See, and that's the thing with language, right? Is that
oh,
we can use the same words and mean two completely different things. And
oh,
that's beautiful
absolutely.
and that can be horrendous.
And
You know
we
what
were
I'm saying?
speaking about that earlier, like children are not taught the power of words, and that, my gosh, we were talking about, can you imagine a school where children were taught that, the power of words and what everything, feels like. Feel these emotions. What does that feel like? Can you imagine doing the what do you notice in school every day? I mean,
Wow. No, I'm sorry. Like that blows my mind just how powerful. Even like that's one question. You get what I'm saying? One question that essentially would change the course of a child's day, right? What are you feeling right now? Because imagine now if the child, learns, or even in their own words, or if they draw a picture, or if they, even use like a
yeah,
swear word, like that is
yeah,
telling you volumes. And now, like you said, like essentially that's a bridge. Because now you don't have to,
yes.
you can't just use your mind and just project onto that child, right? You really give them like that. Oh my God, I hope you start working with schools. I hope you invent your own school one day and start your own curriculum and start teaching
Well,
because
let's do it.
our
What are you
kids
doing
need it.
tomorrow?
Yo, that would be fire. That would be so fire. Oh my gosh.
We do anything and we do it all, right?
Anything and everything. I mean, you have
That's
one
it.
life, one life. So you got to do it all. Oh my
And
gosh.
even if we had many, I'm still going to use this life.
I
Every
mean,
experience.
for me, I was just like, I love when I say like, listen, you have one life. Do I really know? No.
Who knows?
But for me, it's just like, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, even through grief, like grief has shown me something as simple. Oh my gosh. And like, it's kind of like sad, but like, I got this outfit that I really wanted to see, like my nephew in. And one thing, especially when you're shopping for kids, is like, you always want to get the next size up because they're going to grow into it. Right. And then just knowing that, like, I would never be able to see him in that outfit, and it was like my
Yeah.
absolute favorite, all because I was, saving it. And that seems like ridiculous, right? We do it all the time, like even in my family, like, special china for like Christmas time, and special dishes
Yeah.
and special clothing and special, even with me and like candles, like the thought of it is so ridiculous. Like, how can you, like, this moment right now is everything, and it might be, your last moment on this earth in this form, and for you to treat it as something other than special, that it doesn't, deserve your absolute best, of everything,
Yeah.
that it really made me reflect and look at life in a way that I've never been forced to look at life in. So essentially, grief has been my best teacher and my also most hated teacher, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, sorry, man. That just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people say that to me all the time that maybe I only have one emotion. Am I only ever happy? So I'm happy in this moment now. I just don't hang on to those other moments. I just don't hang on to the other emotions. So of course I feel a full range of emotions. I'm a human. I feel
Right.
all the emotions, but yeah, I just seem happy a lot because I'm choosing that. you
Okay.
know? Yeah, I'm choosing that because that's what I feel right now. This to me is the best moment. This is so much fun. I love this moment with you right now. This is wonderful, right?
I
Yeah, I
appreciate
really
that.
feel that. I love our connection, our conversations. They always inspire me. I'm always, thinking on them later. It's great. So, yeah, I really feel that. I'm happy right now because this moment's great.
Yeah, I think emotionally, like I just tripped up one of my wires and like I need to chill out right now. I
Okay.
really need to just sit with I need to just give myself a moment.
This was good. This was
But I
great.
really, really appreciate you joining me and sharing, your whole journey with me. I highly doubt this will be our last discussion or our talk on grief. But thank you
Right.
so much for just holding this moment with me. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Talk
All right.
later.
Bye.
Bye. How'd it go?